Fern McAllister was the first one at the county fairgrounds that Saturday morning, and that was how she liked it. The air was cool and damp. It smelled like wet grass, apple skins, and old popcorn from the night before. Across the road, trucks were already backing into the parking lot. A few early fair visitors hurried past the closed gates with folding chairs, camera bags, and coffee cups in their hands. Fern stood beside the McAllister cider booth and looked at the old press. Her family had hauled it here before sunrise on a rusty trailer behind their truck. The wooden sides were scratched. The paint had peeled off years ago. Still, every fall, it made sweet cider from apples grown in the orchard behind their farmhouse. This year, they needed it to work more than ever. Her father, Tom McAllister, came out from the wagon wheel storage shed with 2 burlap sacks of apples on his shoulder. Her mother, Ellen, was setting out paper cups and stacking warm cinnamon donuts on trays. Fern's little brother, Jake, was carrying a bucket of rinsed apples, one careful step at a time. Tom set the sacks down and wiped his hands on his jeans. "We get the press going now, we might have a steady crowd by 10, he said. Ellen gave a short nod, but Fern saw the worry on her face. They had talked about it all week. The McAllisters had a hard summer. The late dry spell had left the pasture thin. The cows needed hay. The sheep needed grain. The feed store in town would not wait until winter was over. "If we make a good sale today," Tom had said that morning, "we can cover the feed bill." Fern had heard the number. $300, maybe more. A line of people was already forming outside the booth, waiting for the fair to open. Some were friends from town. Some were strangers. A man in a seed cap held his son by the hand. 2 women from the church were talking near the fence. A group of kids pointed at the press and asked when they could get cider. Fern rolled up her sleeves. "Let's start with the first load." Tom fed apples into the hopper. Jake turned the hand crank. Fern caught the juice in a metal pan and poured it through a cloth filter into a clean bucket. At first, the press made its usual groan and hiss. The wheel turned. The apples broke down. Sweet juice ran fast and yellow into the pan. Then, with one hard jerk, the crank stopped. Jake leaned back. What happened? Tom reached for the wheel and tried to turn it by hand. It would move an inch, then stop again. He frowned and bent lower. That's not good. Fern crouched beside him. A thin metal pin near the crankshaft had snapped in half. One piece lay in the dirt. The other was still stuck in the wheel. Tom exhaled through his nose. "Well, that's the part I hoped would last another year. Yora." From outside the booth, a woman called, "Are you selling cider this morning?" Tom stood up and forced a smile. "In a minute," he said, but his voice did not sound sure. Fern looked at the line of waiting customers. 3 more had joined it. A little girl in a red raincoat hugged a paper cup from another stand and looked unhappy. Dark clouds were rising in the west, low and thick over the cornfields. The morning light had gone gray. Ellen lowered her voice. "Do we have another pin?" Tom shook his head. "Not for this model." Jake stared at the broken piece in the dirt. "Can't we just tie it or something?" "No," Tom said. "Not if we want it to hold." Fern stood up fast. She knew that look on her father's face. It was the look he got when there was no easy fix and not much time. "How far is Mrs. Kessler's farm?" she asked. Tom blinked. "The old Kessler place?" 4 miles west, maybe 5. Doesn't her husband have a press like ours? Fern asked. Ellen's eyes widened a little. Yes. He bought it from the same company years ago. Ah. Fern pointed at the broken pin. Then maybe hers has one. Tom looked at the line of customers, then at the clouds. A sharp wind moved across the fairgrounds and lifted a page from a stack of prize ribbons. He said nothing for a second. Fern heard a baby cry in line. Someone laughed too loudly, then stopped. The first drops of rain had not come yet, but the air had gone cold. Take the truck, Tom said at last. And take the wrench set. If Mrs. Kessler has the right part, don't waste a minute. Fern grabbed the keys from the nail by the booth door. Jake looked worried. What if she doesn't answer? Then I'll keep knocking, Fern said. She jumped into the old green pickup and drove out of the fairgrounds lot with dust flying behind her tires. The road to the Kessler farm cut between corn stubble and dark fields. The sky kept closing in. Once she saw a flash of lightning far off over the grain elevator. The radio in the truck crackled, then went quiet. Fern kept both hands tight on the wheel. She was not scared of the road. She was scared of coming back empty-handed. The Kessler farm sat on a rise above a creek. A faded barn leaned a little to one side. 2 red tractors stood in the yard, and a line of geese moved slowly near the fence. Fern parked and ran to the house porch. She knocked hard. After a moment, the screen door opened. Mrs. Ida Kessler stood there in a blue sweater with her gray hair pinned back. She was small and sturdy, with sharp eyes and flour on her hands. Fern McAllister, she said. You look like you've been chased. We sort of have a problem, Fern said, breathing hard. Our cider press broke. We need the little steel pin that holds the crank. Tom thinks your press might have one like it. Mrs. Kessler did not answer right away. She looked past Fern at the dark sky, then back at her face. The fair starts today, doesn't it? She asked. Yes, ma'am. And you've got people waiting. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Kessler gave a short nod. Come on. She led Fern through the kitchen and out to a small shed behind the barn. Inside were jars of nails, coils of wire, a row of old tools, and a workbench covered with dust. Mrs. Kessler opened a tin coffee can and shook it. A few small parts clinked together. Ed kept every bit of metal he thought he might need again, she said. He said a broken machine was just a machine waiting for the right piece. She tipped the can into Fern's hand. There were 2 steel pins and a washer. Fern held one up. It was the same size as the broken one in the press. This is it, she said. Mrs. Kessler smiled, but only for a second. Take both. And that washer. You may need it. Fern stared at her. I can bring them back tomorrow. Keep them if you need them, Mrs. Kessler said. Just get that cider flowing. Fern thanked her so fast, the words nearly ran together. Then she was back in the truck, the parts safe in her shirt pocket, the wrench box on the seat beside her. By the time she reached the fairgrounds, the wind had picked up. One of the big clouds had opened its belly, and a light rain was falling over the parking lot. People were running for the buildings. A man rolled a cooler under his arm. A woman held her hat with one hand and pulled her little boy along with the other. The cider booth was still standing, but the line had grown longer instead of shorter. Some customers had moved under the roof of the livestock barn and were now looking toward the McAllister stand, as if it were the only dry and useful place left in the whole county. Tom was under the booth awning, one hand on the broken press. Ellen had moved the cups closer to the front. Jake stood next to a table of apples and looked relieved the moment he saw Fern. "You got it!" he shouted. Fern jumped out of the truck and ran to them. Mrs. Kessler had it. Tom took the pin from her hand like it was gold. "Good woman," he said. The repair took only a few minutes, but every second mattered. Tom slid the broken piece out with the wrench. Fern held a flashlight under the press, while Jake wiped wet dirt from the bolts. Ellen checked the fit. Tom pushed the new pin into place and tightened the washer. Rain drummed harder on the metal roof of the booth. A gust blew in cold and sharp. The line outside did not move away. If anything, more people arrived from the poultry barn and the exhibit hall, all of them looking for something warm to drink. Tom tested the crank. It turned. He pulled it again, smooth. He nodded once. Fern let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "All right," Tom said. "Load it up." Jake started feeding apples into the hopper. Fern turned the crank while Ellen held the bucket under the spout. The first fresh stream of cider ran into the pan, bright and gold in the gray light. The smell of crushed apples rose up sweet and clean. A man at the front of the line smiled. There it is. The booth came alive after that. Tom filled cups. Ellen handed out donuts. Fern and Jake switched places every few minutes, one turning the crank while the other stacked apples. People bought 2 cups, then 3. Some bought a whole jug to take home. A farmer in mud boots paid in small bills and said his wife would be glad to see him bring something besides feed receipts. A teacher from town bought 6 cups for her students. A pair of teens from the 4-hour barn asked for cider and ended up taking a dozen donuts too. The storm kept pushing people toward the covered walkways, but many of them came right to the McAllister booth instead. The rain made everyone hungry and cold. The cider was hot. The donuts were warm. The apples were crisp and sweet. Soon the press was working so hard that Fern had to wipe juice from the edge with her sleeve between loads. Her hands were sticky. Her back hurt. Her shoes were wet. She did not care. Every time the crank turned, the press made a deep, steady sound that Fern had never loved more. By noon, the fairgrounds looked different. The sky was still dark, but the rain had slowed. Puddles shone in the dirt. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker from the main arena. Somewhere nearby, a calf bawled and a child laughed. Then Mr. Henson, the county fair manager, came hurrying up with 2 other men under a black umbrella. He looked at the long line, then at the sign that read, "Fresh McAllister Cider." "Well, I'll be," he said. Tom lifted a cup to him. "Want one?" Mr. Henson took it, sipped, and nodded hard. "You folks are doing better than the fry stand." The woman beside him laughed. "Better than that? Impossible." Mr. Henson looked at the crowd again. "If I had known this booth was going to pull in half the fare, I'd have put you closer to the main gate." Fern heard that and almost laughed, but she was too busy turning the crank. The afternoon passed in a blur of wet boots, paper cups, and apple smell. People kept coming. Some had seen the line and joined it. Some came because a friend told them the cider was worth it. Some bought cider for the road home. The McAllisters sold every apple they had brought. Then Tom sent Jake back to the truck for 2 more sacks from the trailer. When Jake returned, soaked to the skin, he was grinning. "There are people asking if we have more," he said. "Good problem to have," Ellen told him. Fern glanced past the booth toward the fairgrounds road. The storm clouds were breaking apart now. A pale strip of sky showed in the west. Sunlight touched the wet roof of the livestock barn and made the puddles shine like glass. Mrs. Kessler came by near the end of the afternoon. She had a paper cup of cider in one hand and a bag of doughnuts in the other. "I heard your press held up," she said. Fern smiled. "Your pin did the job." Mrs. Kessler tapped the coffee can she had tucked under her arm. "Ed would like that." She bought 2 more cups for the road and told Tom, "You may have started a bigger cider line than the pie contest." Tom laughed for the first time all day. As the sun went down, the booth lights came on. The warm bulbs glowed against the damp evening. The cider press stood in the middle of it all like an old, proud machine that had earned its place back. People still came. Not as many as before, but enough to keep the line moving and the cups full. At last, around 6 o'clock, the apples were gone. The last jug was sold to a man in a navy jacket who said he had missed lunch. Ellen counted the cash in a tin box while Tom wiped the press with a rag. Jake sat on a crate and ate the heel of a donut. Fern leaned against the trailer, too tired to stand straight. Ellen looked up from the money and smiled so wide that Fern knew before she spoke. "We made it," she said, "and then some." Tom took the bills and counted again. He let out a low whistle. Feed, hay, and enough left for a new belt on the tractor. Jake sat up. "Really? Really?" Tom said. The fairgrounds were almost empty now. The wet roads reflected the last bit of evening light. Far off, someone was loading a prize pig into a truck. A janitor was rolling a trash bin by the grandstand. The storm had moved on, leaving the town washed clean and shining. Fern looked at the cider press. The repaired pin was hidden inside its frame, small and plain. Without it, the whole day would have fallen apart. With it, the McAllisters had sold more cider than they had ever sold before. Tom closed the lid on the empty apple crate. "You saved the day, Fern." Fern shook her head. "Mrs. Kessler saved it." Tom smiled. "You went after the part. That matters." On the walk back to the truck, Fern passed the fair lights and heard people still talking about the cider booth. She caught pieces of it in the air. "Best cider I had all year. Worth the wait. Did you see how fast they fixed that old press?" Fern smiled to herself. The broken machine no longer looked like a problem. It looked like a reason the whole town had gathered under one roof, rain on the pavement, cups in hand, and the smell of apples in the air. By the time they drove home, the clouds were gone. The moon rose over the orchard, pale and clear above the rows of apple trees. The truck bounced along the lane, tired but full of clean metal tools, empty buckets, and the sweet smell that always stayed on Fern's clothes after cider day. Winter was still coming. Feed still cost money. The animals still needed care. But tonight, the McAllisters had what they needed. And the old cider press, which had almost failed at the worst time, had become the center of the biggest sale the fair had seen that season.